Okay. So as the prayer says, we're going to take refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, and we're going to listen to these teachings so we can become a Buddha, so we can benefit all sentient beings. That's the long-term goal. Sangye charang soke chognam la, jangcho baru dagni kyab suchi, dagi chernyen gi pesonam ki, drola penche, sangye drupa shog, sangye charang soke chognam la, jangcho baru dagni kyab suchi, dagi chernyen gi pesonam ki, drola penche, sangye drupa shog, sangye charang soke chognam la, jangcho baru dagni kyab suchi, dagi chernyen gi pesonam ki, drola penche, sangye Drupha Shog. So now, okay, what from your questions? What did you discuss from your discussions? Ask me some questions. What came up? Okay, talk to me, people. Any questions that came up from your discussions? Yes. Where are you? 2 people. Good. Go for it. You first, sweetheart.
I've been reading the workshop book and
yes.
And listening to you. There's lots of bits I probably don't understand.
Yeah.
But there's one bit I feel really blank about.
Okay.
Is if there's trillions and trillions and trillions
Yeah.
of sentient beings, I get that. And there's a really small number of
Humans, yeah.
Options.
Yeah. No, there happened to be a small number of humans. There could be more if people created the merit.
Oh, okay.
It's not as if there's a certain number, you got to kind of, there's no waiting list or anything. If you create the cause, you'll get a human life. It's the result of your actions.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, okay, that's a good point.
The second bit of it then is if animals are trapped in, I don't know the right
I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
pain and
Yes,
suffering,
exactly.
tooth and claw, I think.
Yeah, really. Mm-hmm.
I can't quite get how, I know that they might have had a human liver
In the past, yes.
virtuous seed,
Yes.
but not all of them surely can have had that.
No, okay. This is where it does sound so cosmic, because I mean, to think that consciousness is a beginningless, first of all, is the most bizarre idea we've ever heard. I mean, you either begin in your mother's womb and we're sort of well, it's not so bizarre. First of all, the materialist view, we track ourselves back to the Big Bang, isn't it? And that's a few billion years. I don't know when they say humans started. So we're looking from the materialist point of view where we all began. So we go back and back and back. And then if you're a Christian, you go back to God, isn't it? God is the source. But the Buddhist one says neither of those. So the Buddhist view is this, this is a very odd idea. We've never heard it before. That our own consciousness and the consciousness of every ant, every dog, every hell being, every god, every being in the universe, holy and ordinary, is necessarily beginningless. So if that's, which is logical if we take the view of cause and effect. So I'm going to get to your point. So giving this as a background first. There are trillions of sentient beings. There are never any new ones, and there are never any less, because their minds are beginningless and endless. So the logic of the beginningless is kind of one we've got to get our head around, and that's the concept of cause and effect. So the way the Buddhists would say is the Buddhists observe that consciousness is not physical, and that so then we're looking at cause and effect, then the main cause of something should have a similar kind of substance. So if we're positing consciousness is not physical, the main cause, the most direct cause, the immediate cause, the substantial cause has to be a very previous moment of that type of energy. So this moment of consciousness, this moment of anger in the consciousness, its main cause has to be a previous moment of anger, but consciousness in general, if it's not physical, the main cause of it, the substantial cause of it, has to be of a similar character, not physical, a non-physical capacity for cognition. So if you keep tracking back, we tend to have a feeling that this is not your point yet, but I'm getting to your point. We all have a deep assumption that there has to be a first moment. One of the commonest questions we all ask in all cultures: when did it begin? When did negativity begin? When did suffering begin? When did karma begin? When did I begin? We want a first moment, in other words. So the Christian view, the creator view, is that God is the first moment. So of course, if you're a naughty child at school and you're, where did God come from? You don't ask that question, because there's a whole kind of philosophical view about what God is, this energy that doesn't have a cause, that in a sense is beginningless, doesn't have a cause. God has always been. Well, the Buddha would make that very ordinary and say every single consciousness, every single sentient being has always been. Because each mind, the cause of it is the previous moment of that mind. So then you think, well, maybe I began in my mother's womb. Well, you know, if your consciousness existed in your mother's womb, the moment before that day, the cause of that moment of consciousness of that second has to be a previous moment. So then you get back to the first moment of conception. Well, you know, you can track your egg back to mummy and the sperm back to daddy, but what about your consciousness? Well, the previous moment of your consciousness, which existed before the egg and sperm came together. So you track that back to a previous life, and so you keep going, and you will but necessarily never be able to find a first moment. Not because we can't see it, not because it's hidden, but because there can't be such a thing. Because cause and effect implies that every millisecond you go back 40 trillion years. If you track back mentally your consciousness and you keep going back, the previous moment, and what was the cause of that? The previous moment. And what was the cause of that? The previous moment. And what was the cause of that? You'll never find a moment that you can say about it that there was no cause. You always got to go back to a previous moment. So as odd as it sounds to our minds, because we have a view that something has to have a beginning, there can't be a first moment of consciousness. So the point about I'm getting at here, if there are trillions of consciousnesses, if they're all beginningless, then it follows logically they all have to have, you know, done every negative action there is and every positive action. I mean, we're still in samsara, we haven't realized emptiness. So all these sentient beings, so are the animals, for example, they've been humans in countless lives, we've been animals countless lives, and there are other realms of existence that we've all been as well, the Buddha would say. Logically, if we look at actions, we can see the karmic results. So, given that, then your question is, what's the bit that doesn't make sense?
The gap in it for me is, then is there any way an animal can be reborn as
absolutely, a human? Yeah, absolutely. But the point is, as an animal, you don't have the capacity to create enough virtue, which has to be based in wisdom and also virtue. There's not enough capacity for an animal. It will be very rare for an animal's mind that's so ignorant to be able to create a virtuous action that would be the cause of a human body. But because of their countless other past virtues and in their past human lives, they've got lots of virtuous seeds in there. They've got the seeds of enlightenment in there, but they can't ripen in the animal birth. But at some point, for any one of us, we did take at some point a human birth after being an animal, which means one of our virtuous karmic seeds planted from before, the conditions ripened at the time of our death. And that's why one of the things that the Buddhists would say you can do for animals is, for example, they can't create the merit to become a human, but you know, for example, you could say mantras and let them hear certain holy things which can give an imprint in the mind that can help trigger a virtuous karmic seed that would enable them to get a human birth again. That's the answer. That's the idea. And that gets to the point about, again, down to this sort of this religious component, you know, the Bill's point about that, you know, how come saying a mantra in the ear of any person can have such a beneficial result? You know, what is it about a mantra? What is it about even seeing an image of the Buddha, hearing the name Buddha? And that's the point that the Buddhists would make, that the enlightened beings are so powerful. I mean, it sounds like science fiction, but, you know, if we look at what the qualities, what you'd be like when you become a Buddha, when you're finally a Buddha, this is what Buddha says is the potential of every single consciousness. We all possess Buddha nature. There's a serious kind of teaching in Buddhism that every consciousness necessarily is by definition a potential Buddha. So I like the analogy of an acorn. So we know very well that because we've learned it, that an acorn, this little thing, if you put it in the ground and give it a bit of time, a bit of space, a bit of water, a bit of air, a bit of earth, it'll turn into an oak tree. We know that. It's not evident by looking at an acorn that that's what it is, but we know from experience that that's what it becomes. So you could say, and this is the way that a Buddhist would say it, you know, using this language, every acorn by definition possesses oak tree nature, meaning every acorn by definition, by its very existence, what defines its existence is its capacity to become an oak tree. I mean, you can use it for dinner, squirrels do. You could use it as a weapon. But what it actually is in its bones, in its nature, is a potential oak tree. That's the way Buddha talks about consciousnesses. That every mind is naturally clear, every mind is naturally pure. Not as if we've been pure before and then lost it, but every consciousness in its nature, and the teachings on this in the literature are vast, you know. There's a serious point, which gives us the courage to want to even work. That every consciousness in its nature is naturally pure, and has the potential to be utterly free of all pollution, utterly free of all delusions. This is the key point in Buddhist psychology, and Buddhist philosophy, and Buddhist practice. So we've got to think that through logically, because it sounds a bit mystical to us, you know. I mean, if you think your mind is your brain, I mean, we tried cutting bits out back in the 1930s. They called them lobotomies. Didn't seem to work. So the idea that you can rid your mind of all neuroses, all ego, all fears, and finally become this true, pure being that is your potential is pretty abstract for us in the materialist culture. So what you'd be like when you're a Buddha is pretty shocking, you know. I mean, it sounds completely science fiction to us. I did a conference in Melbourne a few years ago at the Catholic University. I had like a 20-minute slot. And I remember I didn't know what to talk about. They said talk what I wanted. So I remember just before I left, I looked up the Merriam-Webster dictionary for the definition of God. And it said 3 essential qualities: omniscient, infinitely wise, infinite power, omnipotent, and infinite compassion. Well, they're exactly the characteristics of a Buddha. And Buddha's point is, Christian's point is there's only one of them, and he's the cause of everybody else. The Buddha's point is every consciousness has that potential. So you really, it seems to me, I mean, it's my own observation, just by hearing different religions, it seems to me over the centuries, there are many similar observations and findings by different human beings, but the causes of them and the conclusions from them are obviously radically different. But that idea that a Buddha has those 3 essential qualities, that's exactly what Christians say God is. So it sounds kind of shocking for a Christian to say that everyone can become it. But that's Buddha's observation. So when you fully develop your mind, which is beginningless and endless, when you've rid it utterly of all delusions and all the imprints of delusions, and you are a Buddha, a Sangye, you would have a consciousness, your consciousness, which is not physical, remember, will pervade wherever there is existence. I mean, as a kid, when I was a Catholic, I was in love with God, and I loved the idea that God was everywhere. I couldn't work it out. I'd look at my homework and go, God is in the margin of my homework. I'd say, God is in the light switch. I couldn't get my head around how God was everywhere, you know. I thought about it and thought about it. And I also loved the idea that God knew everything. I thought that was great. So basically the Buddha's idea is the same. It's his own observation. He said he's become that. So your consciousness, which is not physical, okay? So right now, our consciousness is completely confined because of countless lifetimes of delusions in this bag of bones. We can't see past our own noses. We live at the grossest of the grossest level of conceptuality. You know, we live at the level of conceptuality which doesn't enable us to see anything. And because we so grasp onto the identity of me on the basis of this bag of bones, so our mind is really, really constricted in its capacity for knowledge, for awareness, for cognition, which is its job. So as you progress, as you lessen delusions, you're literally expanding your consciousness. When you then get shamatha and you go onto a subtler level of mind, you are clairvoyant. You continue to expand your capacity for cognition of this mind of yours, which is not physical. So nothing in its nature really confines it. How can something that isn't physical be confined by space or time or matter? It can't. So as you progress, as you lessen delusions and grow virtue, you're literally expanding your mind until eventually there's not an atom of delusion left. Then it's logical that this consciousness, which is not physical, must necessarily be wherever there is existence. How could it not be where there is no, how could it not be everywhere? It's logical. So that's the first point. Second point, you would be omniscient. You would know that which exists. You'd have perfect wisdom that sees things as they exist. That includes knowing the minds of all sentient beings, all their karma, all their past, all their future, perfectly. You would have this infinite compassion because there's no longer a sense of a separate I, that's gone. And you would have this infinite empathy with every one of those beings as if they were you. And you'd have this infinite wish to only benefit them. You'd have the wisdom to do so, and you'd have the power. They call it, it's omnipotence, infinite power, all powerful. Within the confines of dependent arising, of course. That's what a Buddha is. I mean, that's completely science fiction, you know, that's insane. But that's Buddha's observation. So this is the nature of every single one of us. Every sentient being, so every hell being, every god, every human, every ant, every bug, every slug, every Hitler, their mind has the same potential. And then over countless lifetimes, we've created all these causes. The Buddha would say we've all had countless lifetimes of being highly evolved spiritual beings. There's no actions we haven't done except realize emptiness. We haven't gone as far as that. That's why we're still in samsara. We've been in the God realms for eons. We've been in the hell realms for eons. These states of mind that, according to Buddha, obviously different from the Christian view, because it's not punishment and it's not reward, because no one's there punishing and rewarding. These are, as Lama Yeshe says, hell is not some place where the devil is waiting, saying, ha ha, I'm waiting for Lama Yeshe. No, it's the manifestation of the negative energy of that suffering sentient being. Everything we experience is our karmic appearance. Everything. We create our own realities, our own experiences of sanity and insanity, and even these different realms of existence, the Buddha would say. And there's a whole spectrum of them, from the most blissful states of joy within the peak of samsara to the most intense suffering. And we've all been in all of these realms countless times, Buddha would say. So when we finally cut the root, that's where he diverged from the Hindus, when we can cut the root of the belief in the intrinsic me, that's when we can stop the rebirth, stop the sufferings. Then we achieve our own liberation. Then we add the compassion wing to it, and then we become a Buddha. Then we can help others. I don't know why I said all that, but I said it. I forget what started it. Must have been you. So what's your question, Kevin?
We had in our discussion group, we had a very technical question about a mantra for Manjushri, and we knew the one is Om Rabasana Di, and then we were wondering about the relationship between that mantra and the brief one, Om Namo Manjushri.
Yeah, I don't know. I never understand the evolution of that mantra we say with the prostrations. I don't know. What do you know, children? Have you heard that Om Namo Manjushri and Namo Sushiye?
That's not a Manjushri mantra. That's
What is that say? What's it?
Shakyamuni Buddha.
But what's Manjushri mean there?
Wisdom, I think. I'm not
But
sure,
Manju is gentle. It means gentle voice.
but it doesn't refer to Manjushri.
But but whatever it is, the word, the translation in English for Manjushri is gentle voice. So why we say gentle voice in there? Don't ask me. I don't know is the answer.
That's why I don't know.
Yeah, don't know.
It's not related to Manjushri.
But it still says gentle voice. It still says the name Manjushri. Whatever it means there. Who knows? Yes.
So to follow up, during prostration, should do that shortened version, the mantra, the short version of the Manjushri mantra, or I guess the other one isn't the
Omarupasanadi.
Manjushri.
No, when you do prostrations, you go Om Namo Manjushriye, Namo Sushiye, that little mantra we do. That's what we do when we do prostrations. That's it. There's no short or anything.
And that's the Buddhist mantra.
It's a Buddhist mantra, not Shakyamuni Buddha.
So it's
mantra
different
is
than the other one, the Om Muni.
I don't know what children's telling me. I have no idea what she's saying. She's got some knowledge that I haven't got, so I can't answer for children. So she can give her answer, and I'll give you mine. So what do you want to say, children? You're very welcome. Please go ahead.
I did know the
What have you learned about the mantra that we say when we do the prostrations? What have you learned?
that it's related to Shakyamuni Buddha, not Manjushri.
But can you explain why it says Manjushri?
I cannot.
Okay, so we don't know the answer. And the answer is when you do prostrations, that's the mantra you do, not the Manjushri mantra. Yeah?
And is that
Right.
in our prayer? The other one, is that in our prayer book?
What, darling?
Is that
The Manjushri mantra, there's a little chapter called mantras, a few mantras. We'll do some of those.
Okay, I know the
Yeah.
Manjushri mantra is in
Yeah.
there, but is the one that,
The prostrations,
yeah,
I'm not sure. I can't remember.
In the morning, it's
Oh, no, but he wants to know if it's in the book. I can't remember.
daily prayer.
The daily prayers book. There you go. Must be there. Okay. So what else, people? Questions? Anybody? No questions from your discussions? Yes. Go, darling.
So we had a question, or we were discussing like the relationship between a teacher and or a guru and a disciple.
Uh-huh.
The like the sort of context of that
Mm.
that's come from.
Yep.
And whether that's still relevant in our sort of context.
You mean the modern world?
Yeah.
Well, when I talk about the idea of a teacher, I always use ordinary examples. So I can't see how it's any different anywhere. I mean, I think it's really logical. If we look at our lives, I think there's nothing we've learned to do that we haven't learned from somebody who knows how to do it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Well, isn't that a guru? Guru is just a Sanskrit word for teacher.
But isn't there like sort of a level of devotion that's required where you don't see that your guru can do anything wrong?
Yeah, of course there is. But that even follows logically in everything, I'd say. I mean, if you think of it, I know, yes, okay, we haven't even begun to discuss that yet, but there's if you think about it, the point that Monique's referring to, in there's a lot of, in the literature, there's a lot of discussion in Buddhism, coming from Vajrayana Buddhism, all of Buddhism, about the necessity for a teacher, which is hardly surprising. That's my point. We all need, someone to show us how to do something. It's obviously the simplest, quickest way to learn it is to find a knowledge holder, a person who knows how to do it. So it would seem, so the point that Monique's referring to in all the literature, there's this discussion about the purest level, the highest level, the best level of what they call guru devotion, the relationship of devotion to your teacher, your spiritual teacher. The best level of it, that it will be the quickest way for you to get the realizations, is to cultivate the view that that person in a human body that you have chosen to be your teacher is in fact the Buddha. Now, the point there, it's got to catch 22. Buddhas by definition don't need bodies. They've gone well beyond bodies. They've gone well beyond bodies. They don't need bodies at all. So out of compassion, a person who's become a Buddha will then consciously manifest in bodies for the sake of sentient beings in order to guide them to their Buddhahood. So by definition, a human being can't be, a Buddha can't be a human being. So try and hear the point I'm making. You've got a certain point in your spiritual development, you don't need to be born in any body at all. You've cut the root of all ridiculous bodies, these gross bodies, the result of attachment and delusions. So when you've finally achieved Buddhahood, the actual meaning of the word Buddha is the subtle, unmanifest, all-pervasive, all-knowing, all-compassionate consciousness. But who can communicate with that? We're not. We're as thick as posts. We can't. So that out of compassion, that Buddha manifests in a body. So, at the time of Shakyamuni Buddha, the first Buddha in our time, there he was, this human being who became a Buddha. But nobody could see he was a Buddha. I mean, that place was crawling with gurus. I mean, the place was just thick with gurus, Hindu ones, Jain ones. I mean, that was their trip then. They were these amazing holy people. So no one could tell one from another. How could you possibly know that? We look at a statue and go, oh, there's Buddha, with his curly hair and his long earlobes. But how would you know? If you saw this bloke back then, you wouldn't have a clue he was a Buddha. It's ridiculous. Nobody could possibly tell. So that's why we've got to check up on a person's teachings, do your market research, make sure the person is valid, and then when you're really confident, checking the students, checking their teachings, checking their behavior, you then make a conscious decision, that's the person I want to lead me to enlightenment. That's the person I want to be my spiritual teacher. So that's the person I'm going to imagine is a Buddha for my benefit. Now, why would you want to do that? It's very logical. It's very logical because you want to become a Buddha as quickly as possible. So this devotion you cultivate, having chosen that person as your guru, and their job is to show you your mind, their job is to lead you to enlightenment, then it's obvious. I mean, the very first time I learned to make a cake, I always use this example. It happened to be my mother. And I didn't think of it like that, but I'd done my market research. I'd checked up on my mother. I'd eaten her cakes. I'd eaten her students' cakes, my sisters. Her peers said she was a good cake maker. I wouldn't have known because when the first time I asked her to show me how to make a cake, when I was 25, and I was a hippie and I was in London and I decided I want to make a cake. And that's the first step. You've got to want it. So then I thought I'd ask my mum. I mean, I didn't fly to Melbourne especially, but I was going there anyway. So I said, please, Mum, show me how to make a cake. I'm sure she was very happy, waiting 25 years for me to ask her. She'd always known how to make cakes, but I never wanted to learn. But then I was a hippie and I wanted to make a carrot cake. Well, I remember the event vividly, and this is my point now. It was the first time I wanted to make a cake, so I checked up and I knew that my mother was valid. I'd eaten her cakes, I'd eaten her students' cakes, my sisters, her peers said she was good. I'd done my market research. I was confident. And this is the point, I didn't have any direct experience of cake making. So anyone could have said to me, put 47 eggs in, and I would not have known if it was true because I had no experiential knowledge. That's why you have to check up. So I'd done the research with my mother. I was ready. She was there. And the interesting point is I remember this day. It's imprinted in my memory because it's the first time cakes became real for me. Why? Because of the human being. As Lama Yeshe said, Buddha's dead. But the Four Noble Truths become real for you when you get it from a person who knows it. That's your teacher. But you have to choose that teacher. They can't shove it down your throat. You can bring a horse to water, you can't make him drink. We're the boss in this situation. We choose. So I chose my mother. Please show me how to make a cake, Mum. She told me. And if I then said, well, what do you mean 2 eggs? Why not 6? How do you know what you're talking about? I had to be confident my mother was valid. I had to be ready. I had to be confident. So I would listen with an open mind, with devotion, with no question. I did not question my mother because I'd done my research. I didn't have blind faith in her. I had wisdom faith in her because I'd checked up. I did exactly what she said. And I haven't made a cake in 30 years, but I better make another cake. And it was an apple and walnut cake. I remember it vividly because it was the first time cakes became real. So the preparation in my mind was what was necessary for me to get my mother's wisdom from her mind into my mind. It's like I received an empowerment from my mother. And I mean that sincerely. So that's how they talk in Buddhist things. You receive empowerments from the transmission from the guru's mind to your mind. They make it all sound holy. Well, it's the same as my mum. My mind was ready. She was qualified. I was ready. I listened. I did what she said. The result came. So imagine if I found fault. And this is the point. Our deluded mind now, we always find fault. We're separate from everybody, even if it's our best friend. And we're talking to them. We're already in our mind criticizing them as they're chatting away, you know. Oh, she's a bit fat now. Or she's talking too much. Oh, yes, Mary, as you're smiling, listening. We always are finding fault. It's the nature of ego to find fault, to separate ourselves from others. So this idea of devotion, I sort of mentioned it casually, I think, a few days ago. It's very powerful. Devotion means your heart is wide open. Well, if you're going to have devotion to somebody, you better choose them carefully, please. As Pabonka Rinpoche says, you choose your guru very carefully. You're going to end up like them. So that's the point. If I'd been naive and asked my mother to make me a cake because I thought, you know, it's the cheapest way to do it instead of paying someone, and she told me how to make a cake that was crummy, I hadn't done my research. And that's what I learned actually. It's very interesting. When I did martial arts, and when I was a feminist, and I was living in New York, and I'd done karate already, and I wanted a women's dojo. It was reasonable. I was a radical feminist. I wanted to do a bunch of other women, you know. So I chose this dojo, and I studied for a year there. Then I went back to Melbourne, and I joined another dojo. I couldn't find one with women. By that point anyway, being a feminist, I'd made a decision that I couldn't keep hating half the human race. It was a big kind of move for my mind, right? This is a serious point. So then I found this dojo with a male teacher, the same school of karate. And I told him I was in whatever level belts, and he put me there, my first class. And after the first class, he came and he said, you got to go back to the white belts. Because you could see I'd learned wrongly. And I was really insulted and really offended. My pride was really hurt, you know. But then I thought about it, and that was the first time in my life I realized the need for a valid teacher. Because I chose the teacher in New York for the wrong reason. So I didn't know she was teaching me wrong. I hadn't done my research. She was not a good teacher. I learned wrong for 1 year. So I had to go back to basics. And that's when I realized the necessity for a teacher and to check up and have confidence that you've got the right teacher. And you have to do that. Because you can't tell who knows anything. So I couldn't, so then, okay, for me, Lama Yeshe is my guru. Lama Zopa, they look like human beings to me. You know, they look like Dalai Lama's like a human being. I can't tell if they're Buddha. I have no idea. So why not have the view once I've checked up, once I'm confident, and if I think Lama Zopa is the Buddha, then obviously everything he tells me to do will be perfect advice, and I will do it. And who is the beneficiary of that? Me. It's really logical, but it doesn't sound comfortable for our minds. Are you communicating? Mm-hmm. It's not easy because we rather find fault. The other one is we rather believe in what we see. So Lama Zopa, for example, he's famous for teaching way into the middle of the night. Okay? He's famous for that. Now he's my teacher. I've chosen him. He didn't make me his teacher. He didn't make me his disciple. You know, I knew him for 10 years before I realized he was my teacher. He just sat around twiddling his thumbs until I got ready. Then finally I realized he was my guru. So then the hard work started. So now I've chosen him to be my teacher. That means I see him as the Buddha. So if he's a Buddha, by definition, there's no delusions. There's no delusions. That means whatever he does has to be for my benefit. It's a really powerful teaching. It's a very powerful way to see it. It's so personal, and it makes you quickly smash ego. So there I am sitting there at 3 in the morning, going crazy, because I can't stand sitting cross-legged, wishing he would end, and he's doing one more, yet one more prayer, and an hour later, more prayers, and you just never ends. You want to go mad. So the easiest thing in the world is to blame the person. Doesn't he know we're tired? I mean, this is the point. So if you're really trying to work on your mind, you're trying to recognize what delusions are there and go against them. That's your job. And that's the job I gave Lama Zopa. I gave him the job of showing me my mind. So instead of unhappy, doesn't he know we're tired? Thank you, Lama Zopa, for showing me my pathetic mind. Then who's the beneficiary of that attitude? Me. So it's really just but it's not easy. We'd rather find fault. We'd rather blame out there. And then you hear all this, then we're naive and stupid when it comes to spiritual things. We'll believe anything anyone tells us. I mean, I told you that story about a friend of mine in New York, Indian from this continent, and her ex-boyfriend, made a movie about his experience of pretending to be a Hindu guru and starting an ashram in America. Everyone lining up, having faith in him, asking him to be their guru. And he announced that the whole thing was just a ploy, just to show how stupid people are. He was not qualified. But because he looked like a guru, sounded like a guru, smelt like a guru, they thought, oh, he must be a guru. Please be my guru. He had no qualifications. So when it comes to spiritual things, I mean, we've got far more intelligence choosing a cook than a spiritual teacher. We'd lose all common sense. Anyway, some of the things in there I said make sense? Okay. But it's hard. Because we don't like to see our minds. I remember even Mr. Lee, my Kung Fu teacher, later on when I became a nun, and then 10 years later I did more Kung Fu, or a few years later, when I was a nun in London, and I chose Mr. Lee, my Kung Fu teacher. But that time I did my market research, and I could really see he was a good teacher. I went to some of his kids' classes. It was amazing to see these kids, you know, really incredible. So I chose Mr. Lee to be my teacher. Well, I mean, the point is I was one of the, you know, I was a devoted student. I went 6 days a week. I mean, he taught 7, I would have gone 7 days a week. There were 3 of us who were like the teacher's pets. 2 boys, one was 14 and one was 19, and there was me, this 42-year-old Buddhist nun. They didn't know I was a Buddhist nun though, I wore lay clothes. So we were the 3, I felt like I was 15 years old, you know, we were the fanatics who went to every class he did. We were like the teacher's pet, you know. We'd go to McDonald's afterwards in Chinatown and eat 4 pounds of chips after class, you know. I wouldn't eat after noon because I wanted to have an empty stomach when I did training. I trained, when I was working for Wisdom, 3 hours every day. I was in bliss, you know. So Mr. Lee was my teacher. So he would scream at me. I was honoured he screamed at me. I didn't want to sue him because he was not stupid. He could tell I wanted his karate, his kung fu. I'd go 6 days a week. The man could tell I wanted his kung fu. I was sincere. So he pushed me to my limit, and I was really honoured. It means he really cared, and that means he really pushed me. I wasn't insulted that he shouted at me. I felt really proud. I was honoured because he knew I wanted his kung fu, so he wanted me to to do the best. So he pushed me to my limit. I'm very happy about that. That's the guru's job. If you're interested in the Dharma, and my lamas from the beginning, I mean, my Lama Yeshe dumped me in the deep end in the beginning to show me my mind. You know, I was so delighted. It's hard work. It's hard work. It's the hardest work we'll ever do. But that's why we need a teacher. And I can say with absolute certainty, whatever I've done as a Buddhist, I could not have done it without the presence of my 2 teachers. There's no way in the universe. No way in the universe. Not possible, I would say. Is it making sense what I'm saying? People? Yeah. What else? Anyone? Questions from your discussions? So, okay, well, let's continue with purification. So, roughly speaking, we went through the 4 steps. Did you get the 4 steps? Did it make sense? Did you not have any questions about the purification practice? Did you see the logic of it? Were there no questions about that? No? It made sense, did it? Okay. And the thing is, as Lama Yeshe says, the power of purification is the power of regret, the power of reliance, the power of the remedy, the power of resolve. It's our own mind that does it. And we all know the more determined you are to achieve something, that's the main cause of achieving it. That gives you the inspiration. So the same here. You know, it's because we have a view about ego that I'm this self-existent bad person, then we think, well, you know, I sit there and I imagine purifying, and I imagine regretting, and I imagine all this. We think, what good does that do? I'm still a bad person, we think. That's how we feel. That's really bizarre to think that, you know. It's like you've been playing piano for 10 years, but you still keep thinking there's no progress. That's how we think, actually. I remember one time a person emailed me about something he did really bad, he said, 20 years ago. He didn't want to say what it was, but he had terrible guilt and shame about it. So then he became a Buddhist. And so for the next 20 years, he said he'd been trying to you know, he'd been doing all these good things, helping people, doing this, doing practices, doing that, doing all lots and lots and lots of virtuous things. But he still talked as if he was still that bad person from 20 years ago. What I'm meaning is, if you've been playing piano for 20 years, the mistake you made 20 years by now has gone because you've fixed it. You've now counteracted the mistake and you've played piano. But that's ego. We think I'm still a bad person. Even though every one of us every day makes effort. Everybody does something virtuous every day. But we still have this concrete view, I'm a bad person, as if I'm the same bad person that was born, you know. That's the way ego grasping works. We cling to this view. Even though we do good things every day, or we remember as the bad things, we never think of the good things. And in fact, every single day, we're this work in progress. Every second we've had a virtuous thought, we're adding to our being a better piano player, but we don't notice it. We just remember the bad things. That's how ego grasping works, you know. But the purification practice is unbelievably powerful if we understand it logically, psychologically. Your mind is the one that does the regretting because you don't want suffering. Your mind has compassion for others. Your mind imagines purifying. And as Lama Zopa says, really the more you have confidence that you're purifying, to that extent you purify. Because it's your mind. It's logical. The more effort you put into chopping a tree down, if you just go blink, blink with one little axe and say, oh, it didn't go down. But if you whack it really hard with a big axe, it'll go down. The more effort you put in, logically the result will come. It's dependent arising, you know. It's interdependence. So the more we have confidence in that, the more optimism we'll have and the more self-respect we'll have. It's really important to think that way. So Lama Zopa says we're insane not to do the purification practice every day, only because the nature of our delusions are that throughout the day we've been creating countless negative seeds, just naturally, as well as the good. So we've got to get ahead of the game. You've got to do weeding every day, basically. We know how dynamic a garden is. Well, it's the same here, dependent arising. Every second, something's going on. So we want to really, so if you, like I said, if you have a really, you live according to reasonable virtue, don't kill, don't lie, don't steal, even more so in the context of keeping vows, and then do some purification at the end of the day before you go to sleep, you've really got an excellent day's practice. You can't fault that, That's incredible. You're putting just bombs in your mind, purifying your mind hugely. So now the point, that's probably the question that's implied here, when does the negative karma finally finish? Well, it finally finishes when you realize emptiness. And that's the one that really initially is very abstract for us. We've got to really think logically through what that means in order to understand, Have we talked about emptiness yet? I can't remember.
Not really.
We didn't. Okay. The Buddha's saying that all the things we do that sow seeds in the mind that ripen as future experiences, both good and bad, in other words, are rooted in this root conception deep in the mind that truly believes I'm a real, solid, definite, intrinsic, there's a real, solid, definite, intrinsic me in there. So we don't think we think that, but we so assume it and we act upon the basis of it, of that belief. And that's what Buddha says is what keeps us locked in samsara, locked in this constant process of sowing seeds and bringing fruits, So when we cut that delusion by what they call realizing emptiness, and that only can happen in subtle meditation, when we've got single point of concentration, and masses of hard work, understanding the conventional way things exist. I think we're not going to talk about it yet. Didn't we talk about something? We didn't mention anything about emptiness? A little bit, didn't I? Okay. Anyway, just the point now. That's when we finally cut the root. And that's what cuts then attachment, cuts aversion, and all the other delusions. And that's from the okay, they will say that's the thing that the Buddha would say we've never done until now. We've had all these realizations, we have great powers, many spiritual realizations, amazing. We haven't gone as far as cutting the root, cutting the belief in the assumption of an intrinsic me. This deeply ingrained, primordially held viewpoint that the Buddha says is the deepest lie of all. So when we have our first moment, what they call your first direct insight into the reality that there never has been, isn't, and could never be that kind of self. In subtle meditation, that's the first moment of our realization of emptiness, quote unquote. And from that second, we begin our climbing out of samsara into nirvana. We've got more work to do, but we can't fall back after that. We stop being an ordinary being and we now get called a superior being. We've got the direct insight into the way things exist, ultimately. These words are very abstract for us. We don't talk like this, But this is the Buddhist view. And all the teachings we're discussing so far, karma, about the mind, lead us to that. Lead us to that. Lead us to this. Prepare our minds to understand how things exist, both conventionally and ultimately. And of course it's abstract for us. We don't talk like this. In fact, this the sense of I that we have, this vivid feeling of some little I in there in the middle of our chest that kind of runs the show and is this and does that and thinks this and wants that, and all that vivid feeling of a definite, solid, intrinsic me is so ingrained and natural within us, it sounds just plain silly to say that there isn't such a me. It sounds weird. We can't understand. We can't even hear the words properly, you know. So we seem to be talking about it whether I like it or not. So just let's have a little look at that. We'll keep coming back to it. So this is why preparing ourselves in junior school by thinking about karma, which as I mentioned is a first example of dependent arising. This is kind of the shorthand term they'd use in Buddhism for how things exist conventionally. And Buddha presents 3 levels at which things exist conventionally. And each of these levels is where at these points is where he diverged from the prevailing views at the time, where he argued with the prevailing views that there was, in the Hindus, and there's many views there, I'm not trying to insult them, but where he diverged from them was on this final point about what exactly is the self and what is it not. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, it was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began the investigation, the internal investigation of the nature of self. Amazing, amazing beings, you know. Well, Buddha went as far as he could go there, and they posit that there is an intrinsic, permanent, unchanging, uncaused Atman, they call it, self. The Christians call it a soul. The Greeks call it an essence. There's always something that in all these great thinkers and philosophers, there's something that they posit that is there, that's the intrinsic me that does things and has things and becomes things and is things. The Buddha says, no, there isn't that kind of self. And there's so he presents many arguments to different prevailing views at the time, and one way of presenting is, he calls it these different levels of dependent arising, how everything in its nature, everything that exists, every self, everything, every peanut, anything that does exist necessarily exists interdependently. There can't be such a thing that exists without depending on something else. That's the idea of dependent in Buddhism is massive, because he's arguing with a prevailing view that says there is indeed a real, solid, independent self. And Buddha says, not possible. The whole concept of a creator is exactly the same philosophy, that there is a real energy that is permanent, meaning unchanging, uncaused and unchanging. Buddha says impossible. And so much of the work one has to do, both first philosophically and then in meditation, is to get to see the truth of that. How dependent arising is the way everything exists. Everything exists in dependence upon different factors. So the 3 main levels at which things depend for existence, Buddha says, the first one is causes. And karma is a perfect example of that. So it seems to me, by thinking about karma in relation to oneself, one's conventional self, the general self that we are, then the way we are now, the way ego grasping makes us feel, is, as I said, is where this innocent victim, that in other words, what happens to me in my life has got nothing to do with me. Stuff happens to me unfairly. Nothing to do with me. That's the exact expression of the belief in a permanent, uncaused me. And Buddha says a load of nonsense. So thinking about karma, it seems to me, is a marvelous way to loosen the grip, to counteract the instinctive belief of the innocent, permanent, uncaused me, not fair me, the self-pity me. It completely changes. Like I said, the experiential implication of karma is it loosens the grip of this poor self-pity me. We become more grown up, more accountable. We realize that that what goes on in our life is the fruit of our actions rather than somebody else. So karma is a very powerful way to lead us to understand more deeply dependent arising, which is the king of logics, as Lama Yeshe puts it, to realize emptiness, which is the shorthand for the ultimate way that things exist. So the next level of dependent arising is very interesting. This is not the subtlest. There's the third level, the subtlest, the real meaning, and we'll go into that later. But this one is very interesting. Basically what Buddha is saying is that because of this ego grasping, which is the colloquial term for this ignorance, ma rigpa, this root ignorance about the way things exist, known colloquially as ego grasping or self-grasping, having that deep in our bones causes us to totally believe that in here somewhere, you know, within the parts that make up each person, body and mind, that there is definitely a special part that's like the boss part that runs the show among all the other parts. Like my friend Pende says, walking hand in hand with the other parts. And the parts are what? My mind. What are the parts of my mind? Anger, love, jealousy, kindness. Thousands of parts of your mind. And then what of your body? Thousands of parts of your body. You know, knees, feet, bones, ligaments, pee-pee, caca, blood, eyeballs, eyelashes. There are millions of parts of our body, and there are many, many parts of our mind. And we can see that that's what makes up a person. That's what makes up a mug. A mug is made of many bits and pieces. So this level of dependent arising for the Buddha, he says that everything exists in dependence upon their bits and pieces. Everything exists in dependence upon the parts that make it up. So what he says, the mistake we make is that we believe, because of this ego grasping, that there is an extra part in there, like a boss, like the landlord part, like the puppeteer. And that part is called I. We believe that totally. This is not the subtlest mistake, Buddha says. But it's really interesting to do the analysis. Our language expresses this. So there's many logical arguments when we're studying it in more depth in the philosophy, as well as then in your meditation, you have to then experience the truth of it. There's many arguments we need to use to counteract this misconception. Because the Buddha says this view of the independent me is the cause of all suffering. As abstract as that sounds to us, we can't even see that. When we hear those words, it sounds so kind of what, you know? Because it's why? Because the mistake is so primordial. Because we do it so naturally. It's so automatic. It's such a given for us. We don't notice it. So there are many arguments we have to use, logical arguments to counteract these absurd propositions that ego grasping makes up. Because delusions are all liars. And this is the other point. Going to junior school, karma, that helps us understanding dependent arising, that prepares us for emptiness. But in the second level of practice, where we start to look into our mind, and we realize we look into the contents of our mind, remember, and we've got the deluded neurotic states of mind, and we have the valid ones. So by learning about how attachment and anger and all the other delusions have the particular characteristic of exaggerating, of not being valid cognitions, that prepares us now to understand that component, to understand how ego grasping is the subtlest lie, the subtlest misconception of all. So these first and second scopes of practice prepare us for this. So one of the logical arguments you have to use, they call it one and many. This sounds so peculiar, but we'll do the experiment. You'll see. If I say to you, I make a statement, I have an iPad a table and a cup. Forget the lid and forget the saucer, okay? So obviously when I say those words, and you know the meaning of those sounds that came out of my mouth, and where the sounds come from, your eyes will go there, and then you will immediately, that's what we do, you'll immediately verify that what I just said is valid. So here we're talking conventional reality. And this is what we have to do first. But Tsongkhapa presents this whole teaching about emptiness in the framework of the two truths, as they call it. Conventional truth, ultimate truth.